So we're going to talk about a claim that's been going around for at least a year now, that when the United Kingdom terminates its EU membership, trade between Britain and the EU will cost £20 billion per year. This claim was billed in the media as an inconvenient truth, and the head of HMRC, which is like the British IRS, quit last week over alleged backlash to the claim. So it seems like a great time to put on our hat of reason and our good philosophy glasses and take a closer look. The inconvenient truthiness might make it sound like it will cost the United Kingdom £20 billion, but that's actually not the reasoning behind the figure. The breakdown is $6.5 billion for customs declarations to the UK and $6.5 billion for customs declarations to the EU, plus an approximate £5 to £8 billion for accommodating EU regulations, meaning that the total cost of trade to all parties involved could be between $17 billion and $20 billion per year. The first thing to notice is that the £20 billion figure is the highest possible figure of an estimated range, even though it's the only figure you'll see in any headline on the topic. This is a great reminder to stay skeptical and to ask questions, because when we're seeking the truth, care and humility will get us closer than excess. Secondly, this figure might or might not actually be true, as in the situation that will occur in reality. I'm going to take a positive interpretation and assume that it is completely true. First, let's start with some facts. Any country that is a member of the EU can trade with any other member country without paying tariffs. For countries like America or Australia that aren't part of a trading bloc like the EU or Mercosur in South America, there is the option of negotiating a free trade agreement, or FTA, with a country that you want to encourage to do more business with yours. And finally, if you've got no FTA and no bloc membership, then you trade under WTO rules, World Trade Organization rules, which include things like maximum caps on tariffs and so on. By the way, remember what Mercosur is, because that's going to come up again. The UK is not allowed to negotiate any trade deals with anyone as long as we are part of the EU. Instead, what happens is that the EU negotiates on behalf of all of its members. These trade deals account for about 11% of UK trade, while trade with the EU itself accounts for just over 50%. This leaves over 1/3 of current UK trade outside of the EU and unprotected by an FTA. Okay, more facts. The countries with the highest GDP are more or less in order: the USA, China, Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, India, Italy, Brazil, and Canada. Russia, South Korea, and Australia, which will be of interest momentarily, are 11th, 12th, and 13th. When you look at industrial production, which is a component of GDP, the rankings change a little bit. Roughly speaking, it goes China, USA, Japan, Germany, India, Russia, Indonesia, Italy, UK, South Korea. And they might shuffle around a bit depending on which month or which quarter you're looking at, but essentially it's the same group of countries producing the wealth of the world. Which brings us to the last batch of facts. There are currently no EU FTAs with China, USA, India, Russia, Indonesia, Australia, Brazil, nearly every high GDP country. It is absolutely bananas. Brazil is the closest because they have more or less got a free trade agreement as a member of that Mercosur trading bloc that we mentioned earlier, after 20 years of negotiations. People were still hoarding food for Y2K when they started negotiating this deal. A couple of months ago, there were headlines celebrating this like it was a big accomplishment and not a total embarrassment, all of which points to the conclusion that no matter how much toilet paper and powdered milk is left in your Millennium stockpile, trying to negotiate with the European Union is basically hell. It's worth saying the withdrawal agreement in essentially any recognizable form is not a free trade agreement. It is mostly terms that you would never find in a free trade agreement. You would never ask of an independent country if you were negotiating a free trade agreement with them. It is not an FTA. You can't negotiate in good faith if you don't respect the parameters of the problem as voted for by the British. That an acceptable solution cannot involve being federalized by the EU. It cannot involve regulatory control. And you definitely can't negotiate a trade deal if you have intentions other than encouraging and stimulating free trade without sacrificing political liberty. Remember that free trade also enriches the state because the state does not generate any wealth. That includes the EU superstate. All the money needed for moving every chair and index file and complimentary iPad in the European Parliament from Brussels to Strasbourg and back again is skimmed off the top of the wealth generated by trade. Which brings us to those EU regulations worth £8 billion. And looking at that list of countries by GDP, only 3 of which are EU countries and who really generate a fraction of the wealth of the rest, you have to ask, is it really true that it's this bad, this expensive to accommodate EU regulations if you are trading from outside of the EU? If not, there's really no point in discussing this claim in the first place, and certainly no point in a man resigning his job over it. If so, why? Why would you create such a disincentive for most of the world's economy to trade with you? If EU regulations really are so opaque, so difficult to accommodate, and so expensive that trading with the EU is a punitive experience, that is not an argument for staying within their limits. That is an argument against such limits existing at all. For them to double down on this kind of cost would be crazy. It might punish the UK, but it would punish the EU's own member countries as well. And yet, while foreign investment to the UK has only increased since 2016, following the referendum, the EU actually responded by tightening its foreign investment regulations. Germany, the carry of the bloc, especially in the UK's absence, is cutting jobs. And Deutsche Bank has its lowest share value in 150 years. A poorer Europe is a poorer world. This approach benefits no one, unless you think it's more important to entrench political power at the expense of absolutely anything else. If that £20 billion price tag is a real thing, it is an amazingly strong argument for having absolutely nothing to do with the EU's approach to global trade, and for putting our efforts and our creativity into a completely different, more dynamic, more flexible, and above all, more free approach to solving the fascinating and valuable problems of international trade, and with the exponential problem-solving power of the other countries doing the same, rather than seeking ways to thwart it. After all, problems are inevitable, so we're going to be solving something no matter what. Fortunately, because those problems are valuable and are fascinating, there are already many people interested in solving them. The solutions themselves are not straightforward. While the removal of tariffs, double taxes, other barriers to free trade is fundamentally a good thing, FTAs are certainly not the rule amongst the biggest global traders. And in some cases, that preferentiality can actually cause trade to be diverted from other countries and harm a country's overall economy, as with America and Australia, who would have made more money trading under WTO rules than with their deal as a result of trade diversion. But when an FTA is good, it's good, and non-EU countries have hardly been shy about wanting something good with the UK. We know that Japan is eager to replicate with the UK the same deal that they made with the EU. We know Switzerland already has. China doubled their trade with New Zealand after signing an FTA, and Switzerland's FTA with China has been beneficial to both countries so far, giving the Swiss access to trade Chinese stocks, and the Chinese access to high-quality Swiss machinery and to the Swiss franc, perceived as the stable alternative to the euro. Although WTO tariffs between the US and the UK are already quite low, we know that America is eager to negotiate with the UK. Remember, we are not allowed to negotiate at the moment until we have left the EU. We know that India, New Zealand, Australia, countries with powerful historic connections to the UK, are eager to negotiate, as should we be, motivated by wealth, by value creation, and by the cooperation that free trade generates, rather than by the preservation or concentration of power. In fact, when you tackle these difficult problems, not as a political weapon, but as an opportunity to be creative, the possible solutions awaiting discovery are quite literally infinite. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I especially hope that it was helpful to you in some way. Please go ahead and subscribe for more facts, more memes, more rational optimism in the future, and remember, trust love, seek truth, keep asking questions.